Hello, and welcome back to Mammalian Anatomy at Keuka College. Today we're going to continue our lecture on Chapter 13, the Central Nervous System. And in this video, we're going to focus on the brainstem. The brainstem is the most caudal part of the brain, so it means that it's closest to the tailbone, and it's actually going to have some of our fundamental functions and life-sustaining functions of our brain. First and foremost, it's going to act as a passageway between the cerebrum and the spinal cord. The brainstem is connected to the spinal cord and the diencephalon, and it will act as a relay station between the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord. In addition to acting as a relay station, many cranial nerves are going to originate here. So there are two types of nerves that are located in the body, cranial nerves versus spinal nerves. Spinal nerves are going to originate off of the spinal cord, while cranial nerves originate off of the brain. We're not going to go into specific details of each cranial nerve. We'll save that for when we go over Chapter 14 in lab. So here we'll just do a cursory overview of their functions. Also, what's going to happen is the brainstem is going to be responsible for necessary reflexes that are essential for survival. Things that control our heart, our blood pressure, our breathing are all going to be located in the brainstem. And it also is going to integrate auditory and visual reflexes. So if there is a change in light, motion, or sound, our brainstem is going to allow our head to turn and turn our body in response to that change. So there are going to be three divisions of the three divisions of the brainstem: the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. So let's look at where they are on a diagram. So over here, what we're going to have is a sectional view of the brain. And so we essentially cut the brain in half to see some of its internal structures. And over here in green, we see the brain stem. At the top, the brain stem is connected to the diencephalon. On the dorsal side, it's connected to the cerebellum. And on the inferior or caudal side, it's connected to the spinal cord. There are three regions: the midbrain, which is going to be most rostral, the pons, which is going to be in the middle, and it's going to have a wedge shape. And over here, the most caudal is going to be the medulla oblongata. If you want a more detailed view, you are welcome to look at this diagram. We have the ventral, the lateral, and the dorsal view. And over here, what we can see is the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the structure and the functions of each of these regions. The diagrams that I'm going to be using are going to be transverse cross-sections of the midbrain, the brain stem. And we're doing these transverse cross-sections because it's going to show specific regions that are in the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain that are going to be important later on in this lecture. So over here we have the medulla oblongata. Here we see it on this diagram, and over here we can see the medulla oblongata as a cross-section. It is going to be continuous with the spinal cord, and it's going to be the most caudal. And a general location where it could be found is at the same level of the foramen magnum. The foramen magnum is the largest hole of our skull, and the medulla oblongata will be located there. So what are some of the functions? So the medulla oblongata is going to act as a major relay station between the cerebrum and the spinal cord. And many fibers and axons are going to have to pass through this area. One important set of fibers or set of axons is going to be the axons that are going to carry voluntary motor information. And these are going to go through the pyramidal tracts or the pyramids. And so they will be located over here. Take a note of this area because we're going to be talking about it later when we talk about descending pathways that control motion in our body. Many of these tracts or axons will cross over to the other side through a process called desiccation. And what will happen is it will allow for contralateral control of the body. So what does contralateral mean? It means that the left side of the brain is going to control the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain is going to control the left side of the body. And this, within the medulla oblongata, many of these kind of crossovers are going to occur at the decussation of the pyramids. The medulla oblongata is also going to be a relay station between the spinal cord and the cerebellum, and it also is going to carry information about sensory information. So it's going to be a huge relay station. Another function of the medulla oblongata is going to be containing some cranial nerve nuclei. It will contain the nuclei for the vestibulocochlear nerve, which will be responsible for hearing and balance. The glossopharyngeal nerve, which is responsible for controlling the tongue and the throat, and also important in taste. The vagus nerve, which will control the parasympathetic response within the torso, and the hypoglossal nerve, which will also control the tongue and be responsible for taste. Glossal in anatomy refers to tongue. That's why the glossopharyngeal and hypoglossal are going to be involved with taste and motion of the tongue. The last important thing that the medulla oblongata does is control and coordinate life-sustaining reflexes. The medulla oblongata has a region called the reticular formation. And the reticular formation is going to contain the cardiac centers, the vasomotor centers, and the respiratory centers, which will all maintain life-sustaining properties. The cardiac center will actually regulate the force and rate of our heartbeat. The vasomotor center will actually control our blood pressure by controlling the smooth muscle within our blood vessels. And the respiratory center will regulate the rhythm and rate of our breathing. So the medulla oblongata is going to play a major role as a relay station. It's going to be the origin of many cranial nerves and maintain life-sustaining reflexes, such as controlling our heart, our blood pressure, and our breathing. Next, we're going to go into the pons. Again, we're going to take a cross-section or a transverse cross-section of the pons and show it here to look at particular functions. The pons is going to really be a wedge-shaped structure that is going to form a bulge. So over here, we can see the pons. Whenever I'm looking for the pons, I'm actually going to look for an oval shape located here. That helps me identify it on the brain. And it's going to be actually dorsal to, not dorsal, but ventral to the cerebellum. So what are some of the functions of the pons? The pons, again, is going to act as a major relay station between the brain stem and the cerebellum. So there's going to be a lot of communication that's going to be occurring there. And there are also going to be a relay station between the cerebral cortex and the cerebellum. So it's going to connect many regions of the brain to the cerebellum. It will also be an attachment point for cranial nerves. It's going to be important for the trigeminal nerve and the abducens. Both of these nerves help control the motion of the eye. And it would also contain the facial nerve, which is going to be responsible for moving and sensing the face. It also is going to have part of the reticular formation that's going to help control autonomic behaviors. So the medulla oblongata and the pons are going to work together to control heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, all of those life-sustaining functions. Lastly, we're going to talk about the midbrain. The midbrain is the most rostral part of the brain stem. And here we're taking a cross-section of the brain, midbrain, and representing it here. So essentially what's going to happen is the midbrain is going to be the most rostral part, and it's going to lie between the diencephalon and the pons. So over here is the diencephalon in blue, and this bulbous area over here is the pons, and the midbrain will be located right in between. The midbrain actually is divided into kind of two tracks, and this division actually is separated by the cerebral aqueduct. So over here, what we're going to have is the cerebral aqueduct, and the midbrain will be divided into the tectum and the cerebral peduncles. So there are lots of different structures that are located within the midbrain, and they're going to have unique functions. The cerebral peduncles are going to essentially be connection points that are going to relay information about voluntary movement from the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord. And so this will help with voluntary motions. There's going to also, that voluntary motions and movement is also going to be controlled by the substantia nigra and the basal nuclei. The substantia nigra is located here. It is a highly pigmented area within the midbrain. And within it, it has the basal nuclei. Changes in the substantia nigra and basal nuclei can actually lead to cerebral palsy, and it will lead to a lack of inhibition to additional motions that the body is producing. The midbrain and the cerebellum are also going to be directly connected together and going to communicate, and they'll communicate through the superior cerebellar peduncles. And there will be two cranial nerves that are going to be originating in the midbrain, the ocular motor nerves and the trochlear nerves. Both of these, oops, I made an error. One moment, please. I made an error. The trigeminal nerve does not control eye movements. Rather, it controls the motion of the face and brings sensory information. Sorry, I just needed to correct that really quick. The trochlear nerve actually and the ocular motor nerve help with movement of the eye. Something that is cool about the midbrain is that this is where the visual and auditory reflexes are going to occur. So when my anatomy professor was teaching me about the midbrain, what he used to do is he used to walk around lecturing like everything was normal, and all of a sudden he would drop a stapler, and everybody would jump up and look over to the stapler and just be kind of shocked. And he would kind of laugh to himself and say, haha, I was playing with your midbrain. And so essentially, which was not fun, but it was funny in retrospect. But essentially, the midbrain is going to be responsible for visual and auditory reflexes. So if there is a loud sound, a bright light, or a change in motion, it's going to physically turn your head to respond and look at where that light or sound came from. So this is kind of a very old reflex. It helps us understand our environment and respond to it. So like when we were on like the plains of the savannah, many millions of years ago, our ancestors were able to see lions and things like that moving in the grass. And we developed this kind of skill to be able to see and respond to those dangerous stimuli. So that covers our section about the brain stem. We went over the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. And so what I'm really looking for is you to be able to know where these regions are located and understand general functions for each of these regions. I'm not necessarily going to ask you each of these specific regions on a test. That would be more safe for a neurophysiology course. But I do want you to know essentially what these regions do. So know a function and know where these regions are located. Thank you and have a wonderful day. I will see you in the next video. Be good to yourselves. Bye-bye.